NFL rankings 2021, talking about and ranking every receiver who's played any meaningful snaps in the last couple of years. Now, fair warning, this is going to be a long video. If you want just the top 20, I made a video of that by itself on my channel. You can check that out. I'm going to be skipping over that because we got a lot to talk about and it's going to take a while. But yeah, I think this is really interesting, and I'm doing this a lot because this is what wins football games in a lot of ways. Is the and people talk about this before too, but it's not necessarily the top 5% or whatever of your roster. It's the rest of it, and it's determining who is actually good and who actually matters there. It goes a long way towards determining who's actually a good football team and who's going to win week to week, which is what the whole point of this channel and what I'm doing is. So yeah, let's do this here. Notes real quick. Yeah, I don't really take injuries into consideration in terms of like how injury prone they are. Now, if they've had like a major injury that's clearly sapped them of whatever athleticism or skill that they previously had, somebody like AJ Green would be an example of that, then yeah, obviously it's about who the player they are now when they're fully healthy on the field at their current best. It's just for this season. It's not going forward. It's not who I'd rather have the next 5 years or whatever, just for 2021. It's about who helps you win the most, not necessarily, and this is an important distinction, I think. It's not necessarily who's the best. It's not necessarily who's the most skilled. It's about who, when they're on the field, contributes the most to your team winning a given football game, which is important to remember. It's not fantasy rankings. It's actually how good these players are. And the colors, more just for the first slide. I'm not going through and tearing all the other 100 of them, but and then there's no rookies because until a rookie gets to the NFL, I don't much care about what people say about him. I'll decide how good he is once he gets there. So yeah, this is the top 20. You can look over that if you want to. You can go watch the video. I'm not going to talk about that really at all because I explained myself pretty in detail with those. So after the top 20, here we are into the next 100. So I'm going to talk about every player, not a ton. Because I can get how that would not be super engaging, but that's okay. Yeah, so with this next 10, now you got to remember here, we're still in the tier of receivers who are super, super big positives to their team, and when they're on the field matter like in a really, really positive manner. And that's important to remember. I'll kind of specify when we get more into the replaceable guys, which will be pretty obvious, but yeah, first one out, John Brown. John Brown is really, really good. He's been really underrated for his whole career. I mean, we're talking about a player who does a lot of things that a player like Robert Woods, who if you saw was ranked at 9 in the top 20, does. He does a ton of that stuff. Now, he lacks a little bit of physicality, not really all that after the catch, but in terms of a receiver who's constantly open, especially down the field, he fits that description perfectly. He's really good. He's really fast. He provides everything you'd really want an outside receiver in the modern NFL, outside of, again, not being 6'5", which if you actually look at what matters, what gets football players, wide receivers to be good, it's not their size the vast majority of the time or almost ever. So, yeah, John Brown, really good, number 21. Next, Will Fuller, frankly, a really similar player. Obviously, he has the injury stuff that I said I'm not really mentioning. He's kind of the example of that, why he's so high here despite his obvious injury record, because when he's on the field, he's a borderline dominant player who's, again, constantly open. Him, actually, like I said, he's really similar to John Brown. He's just not so good after the catch. He kind of lacks in physicality, that type of thing, but he's open all the time, especially down the field in really valuable areas. Then Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown's really good still. Don't let his age or all that off-field stuff fool you as far as his product on the field. He's still incredibly good. I probably would have argued before looking into it closer this year that he was the best receiver on the Buccaneers when he signed there last year. I don't necessarily think that now, but point is he's in contention for it. He's really, really good. He's open still all the time. He still has all those skills in terms of knowing how to adjust his routes into space down the field, in terms of adjusting to the ball, wherever it is in the air, having really strong hands. Really, really good. The only reason he's this low is I do think he's lost a step of speed at this point in his career. And similar to these guys, actually a lot of the guys in this tier, he just kind of lacks a little bit as far as the after the catch / non-receiving skills, which keeps him in the top. Like, he's still at this point wide receiver 1, and every team would be happy to have him. But that's just something to remember with that. Yeah. So then DJ Moore. Now, Panthers fans, I know especially DJ Moore can get real defensive, and I've seen kind of wild things about declaring him obviously top 10 or in contention for that wide receiver. And that's just not true. Now, listen, I don't hate DJ Moore or even closer or anything like that. But with him, you're talking about a player who, as an actual receiver, doesn't separate particularly well. He's better than, guys in like the 50s of this list or whatever, but compared to everyone around him here, he doesn't stack up. And who really leans on two things, being he's super fast. I think that maybe even gets underrated with him. And his after-the-catch skills are really good, which was his big thing coming out of the draft, that he kind of runs like running back, which is true. He's really good at that, and that is a super valuable skill. That's what keeps him up here in the top 30, despite my kind of issues with him. But, yeah, I like DJ Moore is a useful player. He's a positive on your team, a big positive on your team for sure. But this idea that, frankly, he's anywhere close to the guys above him, it's just not the case as an actual driver of winning offense in the NFL. But he could get there. He's still really young. We'll see. I would not rule him out as getting a lot better than he is now. But for now, down here, we're just still good. 25, Jarvis Landry. Jarvis Landry is a player who gets shit on a lot because of the whole, 10 catches for 10 yards, that type of thing, which is fair to an extent. Not really since he joined the Browns. But, yeah, Jarvis Landry, talking about a player who's insanely smart, understands defenses really, really well, and is, by virtue of that, open a lot. Now, is he a super, separator? No, really, once you get past Antonio Brown, you're not going to run into a lot of those here. But he does it good enough, better than like DJ Moore around him, and he can do things after the catch, actually, that I think gets underrated with him. He's still pretty good at that. He knows what he's doing, like I said, and if he's on your team, you're talking about a receiver who's going to provide you positive options on almost every play that he's on the field. It's a really good thing. And then Tyler Lockett, another one maybe some people are going to be mad about this low. Listen, he's not lucky to be this high. That's not the right word, but with Tyler Lockett, right, you're talking about a player fairly similar to guys we're going to talk about in the 60s here as far as actual separation ability goes. Now, he has highlights better than them as far as that, and he should be better with how quick he is and everything. But if you actually watch how he runs routes in the initial route tree, he's just not that good at it. He's not awful. Listen, he's still in the top 30 here, but he's not great at it. What gets him this high is there is not a single better player after a play breaks down in the entire NFL than Tyler Lockett. It's not even particularly close. For whatever reason, that's when he decides to actually kick in his insane agility and speed. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it might be how the Seahawks play offense, to be frank. They kind of coach especially their passing game horribly. But regardless of what it is, that's the case. So when he's on the field, that's what he does. But that is still a huge positive. And when he's playing with Russell Wilson, there's a reason he's super productive, will continue to be super productive, and it's still really good because no one in the NFL better after the catch. And also, I don't know if anyone's better except for maybe DeAndre Hopkins at interacting with the sideline. No, this guy's nuts. Tyler Lockett is nuts with his ability to keep his feet in bounds, know where the sideline is, all that stuff. And yeah, he has really some really, really valuable skills that keep him this high. But I will say, as far as an actual play-to-play offense guy, the reason he's this low, where I think some people might think he should be, is because he just doesn't actually get open fairly frequently within the first 3-4 seconds of the play. Then Mike Williams on the Chargers, a player that I'm super high on compared to, I think, most people. And this is another one where the injury-prone levels doesn't take into account for me because when he's on the field, Mike Williams is really, really good still. There are knocks on him because he's a big type of receiver that he kind of gets lumped in with other guys like Cortland Sutton or something like that who's going to appear later on this list in terms of not being able to separate, but that's just not true. Mike Williams, frankly, does a lot of the similar things that like DeAndre Hopkins does. Now, he's not at that level for sure, but he wins on inside breaking routes like between 5 and 20 yards constantly, really. He does struggle a little bit to separate instantly, but in terms of his actual route tree, he's good at that. And I don't know, is he the second, third, fourth? He's one of the top 5 contested catch guys in the NFL, which I talked about in my other video. I don't really necessarily value that as a skill because the difference between the top end guys and the middle just isn't that high, which is still true here, but it's not nothing. It's not an invaluable thing, right? So that's another positive for him. After the catch, he's actually okay. Mike Williams, yeah. If he was a player on a better team through up to this point in his career. Now you've already seen that when he's healthy with Justin Herbert, he's a whole lot better, and that's going to continue to be the case. But if he had been on a better team since he got drafted with a different style of quarterback than Phillip Rivers, he would be valued a lot higher around the league. And listen, Mike Williams, really good. 28, DJ Chark, also really good. He's a player who does everything. He separates above average. He's very, very fast. He knows how to track the ball very well in the air. His problem is he's just not elite in necessarily anything outside of maybe that ball tracking and ability to get to the ball down the field, which is kind of the difference between him and all the guys ahead of him at this point. But he's still really good, a young player who could get better for sure. But, DJ Chark, clear wide receiver 1, really good. 29, Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks is really good still. There's a reason he's been traded for 1 million first-round picks in his career. He's a guy who actually probably gets into the same tier as the guys at the beginning of this slide in terms of being able to separate and actually be able to get open. His issue is he just completely lacks physicality at this point. He can get up for balls down the field, but can't really come down with them. His size is actually a limiting factor as opposed to some other guys who his size have talked about, like a Deebo Samuel or something, who are a little bit better at it. But yeah, he gets open a lot. If he's on your team, he's a positive for sure, outside of the injury stuff, which is a big deal. But next, Curtis Samuel. I would say a receiver in this tier, still pretty clearly worth the contract the football team gave him. He's a guy who actually, given like 6+ seconds, which is a long time, but he's one of the best in the entire NFL in terms of getting open down the field. Actually, he's up there with like Calvin Ridley, who I put really high on this list. He's really good. His issue is kind of similar to DJ Moore, where in the actual initial stuff, or maybe Tyler Lockett is a better comparison, he doesn't actually get open all that well. No, he's a little bit better about it, but he doesn't have the same after the catch elite ability. But he's really good player. After the catch, of course, he's outstanding. They even played him a running back, and he was useful there. Not that says a ton, but Curtis Samuel, really good player. Definitely liked that the football team went out and got him. He just is a little bit limited as an initial route tree receiver as opposed to all the guys ahead of him. Next, Michael Gallup. Michael Gallup's really underrated still. That guy is really good. He's actually very similar to Mike Williams, who I talked about just earlier. Borderline identical, just a little bit worse with the down the field stuff. But Michael Gallup's a really good player. Number 32, Brandon Ayuk. 49ers hit on that. He's 85% clone to Deebo Samuel, who's in my top 20. Brandon Ayuk's really good after the catch. He actually separates. He struggles a little bit more than everybody else we talked about as far as down the field route tree guy, which is okay. And the offense he plays in, that's not a big deal, but it is something that does separate him a little bit from the guys ahead of him. All right, so next we're on to Emmanuel Sanders, another one with his age. I know people like to write him off or say, oh, he must be getting worse at this point. Not really. He was really good on the Saints last year. He was limited by the way they play offense a lot of times, and he's not great, but he's still in that like John Brown vein, Brandon Cooks vein of guys who get real open a lot. He also is pretty good after the catch. His issue more at this point does kind of lack a little bit of physicality. I would say he has lost a step. I don't think it's significantly impacted him, obviously, with him being this high. But if he's on your team, you're talking about a player who's going to be open a lot, like 7 out of 10 times. And that's really valuable, and that's what keeps him this high despite his age. And why the Bills' offense, despite the loss of John Brown, who I liked a lot, not due for a huge regression or anything because they get Emmanuel Sanders, a really comparable player. Next, Kenny Golladay, probably the next big controversial one. Listen, Kenny Golladay has some useful skills that 34, we're still in the territory of all these receivers are really good. But Kenny Golladay, not a great separator at all. He's like Mike Williams or Michael Gallup, but minus the actual ability to get open frequently. Now, he's not horrible at it. He's not like some of these big, like a Cortland Sutton, someone I'll keep pointing to as an example of this, someone who really struggles to get open despite his size. Kenny Golladay more just in the middle. Now, he is really good downfield for sure. He can get open. He has the long speed to keep up with guys and run into space really well. He's still a really valuable receiver. Just as an actual technical guy, he's just not that good. And that keeps him behind the guys ahead of him. Now he's still good. He's still a top, whatever, 35 receiver, which is really valuable. But don't let his highlights kind of trick you into thinking he's this elite guy. He's the type of receiver that I think people who have the idea of like, oh, a number one receiver should be 6'4", 220 and be able to do these things. And Kitty Galladay fits that, so they put him higher. But actually, down in the modern NFL, he's good and everything, but he's just not elite. Then we have Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp was an interesting one. I started off this list with him a lot lower because he very clearly, of all the players we talked about so far, is the absolute worst as far as getting open. But some unique things about Cooper Kupp is, one, he is really good against zone coverages. He's really smart and knows what he's doing, comparable to a guy like Jarvis Landry. And two, after the catch, he's in the borderline elite tier. He's up there with guys not like Chris Godwin, who's way ahead of everyone else, but more like a Curtis Samuel. Now, it looks different the way he does it, but the results is really similar. And he also will kill bad slot corners for whatever reason, kind of a unique quirk about him, whereas he kind of gets killed by good slot corners who know what they're doing. If he's playing against someone who doesn't, he will eat them. That's what happened. Each time he goes for 200 yards, it's pretty apparent because it'll be against guys like the horrible Bengals corner when he went for 200 against them just a couple of years ago. I wish I remembered his name off the top of my head, but maybe McBride or something like that. But anyway, point is, you can tell when Cooper Kupp's going to go off because of things like that, which is a valuable skill, right? If you have somebody who, even if it's a unique situation, can put up 203, it's a really valuable player. So that's why he's up here. Next, Darius Slayton. Darius Slayton's really good. He actually has one of the best abilities compared to all the guys up to, I don't know, Antonio Brown probably in that whole tier of being able to beat like good corners. Like if I was going to pick anyone this last year, I just chose to get opening as Jalen Ramsey. It probably would end up being Darius Slayton. Now he's a little bit inconsistent. He doesn't always go crazy or get open like that. He does struggle with physicality. He's not good after the catch. That type of stuff keeps him down here. But he's still a really valuable player, and he's a guy who could still get better and provides just an option on your offense almost any play because he gets open, and when he doesn't, he actually has ability as far as a contested catch guy, that type of thing. Next, T. Higgins. T. Higgins, I did struggle to rank a little bit. I could see myself putting him higher for sure, maybe also a little bit lower. Truth is, I just don't know. We don't know a ton about him because of the situation he was in last year with Joe. Once Joe Burrow gets hurt, they just don't even have a real quarterback, so it's hard to say a lot about him. Now, I don't necessarily put a ton on that normally, you see, because you can still see what the player himself does, as regardless of what the quarterback does. But with him, they kind of asked him to stop doing stupid things. Zach Taylor, not a good coach, not a good offensive mind, so that limits just my ability to see what T. Higgins is in the NFL. But I definitely don't hate him. I think he's pretty decent or better than decent. Obviously, he's this high. He's pretty good. And he's a player who I think get better. My issue with him is actually I think he's fairly similar to Darius Slayton, that after the catch, he's not really there. He has a little bit better highlights, but on a down-to-down basis, not necessarily. And as a separator, he's good, but he's kind of whatever. He's like at 80% of DJ Chark or 90% of DJ Chark, which is still a really good player, but yeah. Then we have Robbie Anderson. Robbie Anderson is going to be the first of a type of receiver who we're going to talk about a few times, who has really good speed, which is a skill that is really valuable, and despite his other shortcomings is going to put him way higher than he maybe should be otherwise. Now, Robbie Anderson is the best of those guys because he isn't, as opposed to being bad at other stuff, is just above average, which is, leads to a good player. Robbie Anderson gets open a lot. As far as slot routes that rely on physicality, just like running a drag route, because then it doesn't necessarily matter how good the corner is. It's borderline impossible to keep up with him, and he provides a lot of value with that. We'll see if they move him back to the outside now that Curtis Samuel's gone for the Panthers. I'm not quite sure, but regardless, you do have a valuable player. A guy can get open down the field. He's not very good after the catch. In fact, I'd argue he's bad, really, but he does provide value, and definitely with the speed belongs as high. Next, Cole Beasley. Cole Beasley's so good in the 0 to 10 yard range. He's elite. He's better than everyone we've talked about since the top 20, really. His issues, he does really not provide a ton of value down the field. Now, he's not like horrible there, right? Like if you throw him a slot fade, it's not impossible depending on the corner he's against, but yeah, you're talking about a player who's going to be always open 0 to 10 yards, which provides a ton of value, keeps him this high over guys who I think would, on first blush, be considered a lot better. Cole Beasley's the truth. You're really good in that range. Just the value of him is limited by his kind of diminishing returns as you get down the field. Next, Jerry Jeudy. Jerry Jeudy, a player who I could see myself thinking ends up a lot higher than this as we go forward. He's good for sure. He does flash things similar to Justin Jefferson, actually, the other rookie in his year, in terms of like legit getting open, which is this whole thing coming out of college. It's not necessarily surprising, but I will say I was a little disappointed. People talked about him as the best, most polished route runner, like as a receiver ever coming out of college. I didn't necessarily see that. I definitely see the flashes of him being really good at it, but he's not like killing people the way that Stephon Diggs does, the way they talked about him. But yeah, no, he's definitely still showed value. He's a guy who I think down the line in a couple of years could be one of those guys I talk about that gets open 9 out of 10 times, which is super valuable, guaranteed top 20 once you get into that range. But yeah, and he also had a ton of drop issues. Am I long-term concerned about those? Maybe. Hard to say after 1 year. He didn't really do that at Alabama. But yeah, a player who could get a lot better for sure, / is already good, just needs to show it. But yeah, for now down here, 41, Devontae Parker. Devontae Parker maybe is another example. I've talked about Courtland Sutton. Devontae Parker is that, but a little bit better at other stuff, really. An outside receiver who wins with physicality, which is not a super valuable skill. It's not nothing. He's still good. He's really good at it. All that stuff. He's definitely a player you take on your team, but does he actually drive your offense? Not really. But still pretty good. 42, CeeDee Lamb. Another receiver, they talk about that receiver class as being all-time, which, it still could be, obviously. You just have 1 year. But CeeDee Lamb was good. He just was clearly the third best receiver on that team behind Michael Gallup and Amari Cooper, which is not a knock. Those guys are both elite players. But, yeah, I don't know. I mean, CeeDee Lamb, he did a lot of positive things from the slot. But just like Jerry Jeudy, his advertised elite skill didn't quite live up to the billing in his first year. With Jeudy, his route running with CeeDee Lamb, it was after the catch stuff where everybody said, well, I know it was a Big 12, but trust me, he's incredibly good at it. And that definitely didn't show up. Now, he's not horrible at it, but frankly, I don't even know if he was above average. He was just kind of there a lot of times. He had a couple flashes, sure, but I mean, so does every other receiver in the NFL if you give them, 80 targets. But, yeah, I don't know. I don't hate him. He did a lot of other valuable things. I could definitely see him getting better. Still top 50, which is a positive player for sure. But, yeah, then we get Deontay Johnson. Really similar player to Jerry Jeudy, actually, in terms of being really quick, gets open really well, but has horrible drop issues and really lacks physicality. Deontay Johnson is worse about that than Jerry Jeudy for sure. But, yeah, I mean, Deontay Johnson's a valuable player. He's going to get open a lot, which is one of the most valuable skill, which what puts him in the top 50. But his other stuff, not very good. After the catch, he's not very good. Like I said, bad drop issues, struggles with physicality, all that stuff. He's just good enough at that one thing that's going to put him this high over a player like next Tyler Boyd, maybe another controversial one here. And listen, I don't hate Tyler Boyd, but my thing with Tyler Boyd, right, is anytime he does something, and this is something I always have to ask with all the players because this is what separates players, right? It's could any other player do that thing that he's doing there? And with Tyler Boyd, the answer 90% of the time is yes. The things, because value is created once you get past the yes into no, only he can do that or only a couple players can do that, right? With Tyler Boyd, the only time that really comes up is he does notably have super strong hands. And he can make really, really tight window catches in the intermediate, that's good for sure. It's useful. I mean, hell, I have him a top 50 receiver, but he's not really an independent separator almost at all. He isn't very good after the catch. He's not really fast. He's not a threat downfield. And there's just a lot of stuff he can't do. Now, there's valuable things he can do. Like I said, keeps him this high, but compared to all the guys above him, he's just not moving your offense up and down the field. With his skill set compared to any of these other guys. Then we got 45 Deshaun Jackson. Deshaun Jackson's still really, really good. He gets open a whole lot, really similar to Brandon Cooks, just similar thing with lack of physicality at this point after the catch. Deshaun Jackson not great unless he's running in a straight line. His agility is getting a little bit worse. And as opposed to all those guys, Deshaun Jackson, I would argue, kind of never understood how to adjust routes at the elite level that the other veteran receivers that are, ahead of him did. He's not bad at it. If I'm I'm definitely taking him on my team, no question. He's still a valuable player, and he's still really good down the field. But yeah, just a little bit at this point as an actual receiver. Not a killer. Then you got Juju. Juju absolutely does not belong higher than this. I promise you that. I struggled to even put him this high, but it was kind of a question of, what creates value? Because despite me thinking Juju Smith-Schuster is kind of bad as a receiver, bad is a little strong at this point, but he's mediocre. He is still pretty good after the catch. He's pretty good in the air. He does things that I think are less valuable than just getting open. He does do those things pretty well, and he's not like a disaster in terms of separation. He's more in the just above Cooper Kupp tier. So, yeah, I mean, you're fine if he's your third or fourth receiver, but if he's your one or your two and you're leaning on him as such, you're going to struggle compared to, insert every receiver above him in that role. So, Juju, yeah, he's fine, but teams were smart to not give him a big contract this offseason for sure. Next, Sammy Watkins. People hate Sammy Watkins way too much. He gets open a lot in the NFL. He's fine, doing things after the catch. He really knows what he's doing in terms of adjusting his routes. A skill set I've been talking about that a guy like Antonio Brown has. He's really good at all that stuff. Yeah, I mean, he just has been not benefited, but been hurt by playing on teams that have had a lot of options or run kind of unique offenses for the last however many years since he left Buffalo, basically with the Rams and the Chiefs. And that's going to be the case on the Ravens too. He's as fantasy owners know, not a useful asset there. But as far as a guy who does positive things for your offense, he's still really good. And actually, I would argue he's pretty similar to the next guy on the list, T.Y. Hilton. T.Y. Hilton, another one who at this point, I mean, listen, he's kind of Tyler Lockett without the ability after the play breaks down. Now he's better than other guys who are truly that, but he does the things I've talked about actually just with Sammy Watkins in terms of being a really smart guy, knowing what he's doing and finding holes in his own coverage. But with T.Y. Hilton, he just is a little bit less valuable with that because he's not good after the catch at all. When he does that type of stuff, he can struggle at the catch point as opposed to a guy like Sammy Watkins or stuff. Doesn't really have super strong hands. Not really a separator against man at this point in his career. He is still decent down the field for sure. But, yeah, I mean, you still have a guy you want on your team, but not someone who's going to, scare opposing defenses really at all at this point. Then you have Marvin Jones. Marvin Jones is kind of the flip of a lot of the guys we've been talking about in the first and this type of receiver where, as far as a separator, he's probably not going to be doing anything above replacement level compared to any of the guys we've talked about before. He's not horrible at it, but you're definitely getting into the average tier now as opposed to, still a positive in that respect. But Marvin Jones is another one in that top 5 to 7 guys that contested catches. And this kind of was talking about with the size thing. Marvin Jones is not that big. He's compared to a normal person, he's still big, obviously, but he's not some 6'4" monster. He's just around average receiver size. He's just really good at it and knows what he's doing, which is a valuable skill for sure. He's not awful in the rest of the stuff. He's a positive on your offense for sure. And I think he's been underrated for a lot of time. It's been in Detroit, especially. But yeah, you're not necessarily talking about a driver of offense. And really at this point, you're kind of past all those guys outside of some slot receivers we're going to talk about who struggle in other areas that keeps them this low. But yeah, so decent guy. Next, Courtland Sutton. Broncos fans probably be real pissed about this one. Sorry, be better. I like Courtland Sutton as an idea. I think he's cool, all that stuff. And his highlights are nuts. I mean, I still, obviously remember frame by frame that one catch he had. Gosh, I don't remember who it was against, but where he picked it off the ground on the right side of the end zone. But yeah, I mean, he's a guy who provides as much value as you can as far as a contested catch guy, but that's just not that valuable of a skill really in terms of consistent offensive success. And while you're not going to hate having him on your team, he just doesn't separate very well, ever. He's not generally good after the catch. There are situations where he gets into gets downfield against 5'8" safeties where he can body people, but there's a lot of receivers who can do that type of thing. It looks a little bit different, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, he's just not a guy who provides a ton of value versus anyone else outside of that one area, which I talked about. It's just not that valuable to be that good in. Next, Chase Claypool, fairly similar player. He could be a little bit better. He's another one I could argue for putting higher on this list, I think. But again, you're talking about a player who, as a separator, didn't really ever impress me. And even as a contested catch guy, I mean, his highlights were kind of, from this rookie, were mostly defenders fucking up and him being the beneficiary of that, which is more of an interesting side note. It doesn't necessarily make anything good or bad about him. Chase Claypool, yeah. Next, Randall Cobb. Yes, he absolutely still belongs this high. He's still really good. I probably should have put him higher, to be honest with you. He gets open all the time in the slot. He's still good after the catch, and he still gets open down the field. Now, people really, you get the Randall Cobb fatigue because he's been in the NFL for 10 years and he's old, so people assume he's just not the same as he once was. And while that's true, he's still really good and provides a lot of value. And there's a reason the Texans' offense was pretty good last year. And it's not because Deshaun Watson was this incredible player. It was taking nobody and turning into something. They actually had decent offensive infrastructure, especially when they had Will Fuller, Randall Cobb, and Brandon Cooks, who were all better than average receiver. I mean, borderline top tier guys. So yeah, Randall Cobb's still good for sure. 100%. Just struggles a little bit with being a primary option guy who is going to get 15 targets and turn them into a lot. But if you give him 10 targets a game, you're going to do a whole lot better than, frankly, even most of the guys above him. Next, Jamison Crowder, actually a really similar player. These guys just struggle a little bit with the downfield stuff, the crazy big plays, which, yeah, it does matter. But Jamison Crowder, again, you're talking about a guy who's going to be open all the time and knows what he's doing between 0 and 15 yards really well. He also has really strong hands. He's good in the red zone. Jamison Crowder, really positive player for sure. Just with all these slot receivers, their limitations as far as down the field guys does keep them slow. Marquise Brown, sorry he's bad. That's a little harsh. He's just mediocre at all the things receivers are supposed to be good at. He just happens to be really, really fast, which is obviously positive. He still ends up ahead of guys who I think are technically a lot better. But again, it's the type of thing where if you give him 15 targets, yeah, 1 or 2 might go for big gains, long touchdowns, or whatever, but those might be the only first downs you have in the whole bunch. And that can really hurt your offense and your team as a whole with what it does to your defense. And that's kind of where the issue with Marquise Brown comes. Is he getting better? I don't even necessarily think so. I don't think he regressed either. I just don't think he was that good to start with. No, I don't hate him. It's nothing like that. He's still a valuable player for sure. And he's way ahead of a lot of the other speed guys I'm going to end up talking about. But, yeah, he's still – there's a lot of places he can improve. Also, pretty weak hands. Obviously, really likes – yeah. Don't roast him too much. That's Marquise Brown, 54. 55, Adam Humphries. When he's on the field, he's these other slot guys really just even more so minus the down the field ability. Between 0 and 10 yards, he's dominant. But that only gets you so far. Adam Humphries still really good. 56, Sterling Shepard. I like Sterling Shepard. He's pretty clearly the third best receiver on the Giants. He's decent. He's a guy who's going to provide you value without whatever routes and whatever part of the field he's running. Issue is he's just not going to provide you a lot of value with any of them. He's not a killer, against man coverage. He doesn't necessarily kill zone coverage. He's not really all that good after the catch or contested. He's just okay at all that stuff, which creates a valuable receiver, but not elite. Next, 57, Corey Davis. Corey Davis, really unique guy in terms of he actually accomplishes a lot of what the other slot, or not other, but the slot receiver guys I talked about does in terms of being 0 to 15 yards, being really good. Problem there is that just is completely where it ends with him. Really bad after the catch. Can't really separate. He just happens to have maybe the strongest hands, I don't know, in the NFL outside of DeAndre Hopkins. Which is, yeah, obviously not what people expected from him being as high as big he was. He's not a bad player at all, but not really someone who drives your offense. Next, Keelan Cole. Keelan Cole's good. He gets open pretty frequently. He knows what he's doing. He can track the ball down the field. He just struggles with physicality and drops a little bit. Still good, though. Russell Gage. I should – maybe you put him higher. Russell Gage is really good. He's one of these – fits into the Adam Humphries, Jameson Crowder slot guys. He's just a little bit worse overall, I would say, at this point, although – that could be partly because of how the Falcons and their idiot offense played. But, yeah, Russell Gage, good player for sure, a valuable player, as all these guys still are. And that's the thing. We're still on all these guys being clear positives for their offenses they're playing on. Next, Rashard Higgins. Rashard Higgins is really good. He gets underrated because he's played with better receivers and, OBJ and Jarvis Landry. And he's played on a team that's super heavily run first, and he played on some horrible Browns teams. But Rashard Higgins is a guy who provides a lot of value as a separator. He actually – man, if he was on a better offense, there's a chance I would think he's a lot better up there with a guy like even like DJ Shark or something like that. I mean, listen, Rashard Higgins provides a lot of value. He just isn't like super consistent about it. He's not like an 8 out of 10 open guy. He's more of a 6 out of 10, but he gets open a lot, like by a lot. So, yeah, I don't know. It's kind of hard with him, but I definitely like Rashard Higgins. 61, Deontay Harris. Talk about a guy who provides value despite not necessarily being a true receiver. One of the absolute best after the catch. Actually, as a slot guy, he's fine. He's not like an idiot or anything. So, yeah, really valuable player just because of what it provides once the ball's in his hands. And the Saints do a really good job of getting it to him. And he's an easy player to get the ball to, which is nice. Next, Nelson Aguilar. Nelson Aguilar is still pretty good. Definitely a positive. He does obviously have the big drop issues, but, I mean, he gets open. He knows what he's doing down the field as a ball tracking player. He's just a useful player overall. He's going to continue to be until he retires probably. Next, Denzel Mims. Denzel Mims is good. He did some things that I think were really good last year on the Jets. He showed to fit into the category of guys like DeAndre Hopkins or Mike Williams, kind of that spectrum of guys who get open on these inside breaking routes and the intermediate level of the field, which is a valuable thing for sure. Now with him, he just struggled to do it quickly, basically, is my issue with him, which does hurt his value for sure. But you're talking about a player who get a lot better pretty quickly, I think, and does some things as far as even after the catch and at the catch point that I would not be surprised if he ends up a whole lot higher than this as we go forward. James Washington, kind of that minus the upside, basically. Good player down the field. He can do some of that in-breaking stuff. He knows how to track the ball, but I don't necessarily see how he gets better. He really, really struggles to win quickly most of the time. Not good after the catch, that type of thing. Next, AJ Green. Yeah, sad to see him this low, but holy shit, was he bad for most of the year on the Bengals last year. Couldn't separate from anyone. Now, towards the tail end of the year, when he did get a little bit healthier, he did get a little bit better, and hence why he's still in a general positive kind of section of this list. But, yeah, I mean, I don't know. AJ Green, he's just kind of there at this point. He does some smart things the way like a T.Y. Hilton does, but just minus the speed, really, at this point. Brashad Perriman, pretty good. As far as an outside guy goes, he can do a lot of the like traditional thought wide receiver, outside receiver stuff in terms of contested catches. He actually gets open a little bit. He just kind of struggles to do anything quickly or elite. Just keeps him this low. Next, Gabriel Davis. Gabriel Davis is really good, man. This is the fourth Bills receiver in the top 70, which is a lot. I mean, Gabriel Davis showed to be really good last year. I could definitely argue for him being higher. He just didn't have a huge sample size. But you're talking about a player, who got open a lot. Now he was also, whatever the third, fourth option on a team was Stephon Diggs and John Brown, who drew a ton of looks from the defense. But yeah, Gabriel Davis, really good player. Bills absolutely hit on him really good. Darnell Mooney, same thing, really good player. Just as a rookie, he struggled a little bit with physicality, which for a guy his size, not surprising, but frankly, way better than I would have expected as an actual route runner. And it wouldn't surprise me if he grows into the next, John Brown in the league. Scotty Miller, yeah, he's good. He provides value when he's on the field for you. Not a guy you want to throw a ton of targets at because he's not going to come down with a ton of them. He doesn't separate super well, but he's a valuable guy, provides valuable things. He's actually way faster than people think he is. And, yeah, definitely a player you're taking. Next, Paris Campbell. Paris Campbell's been hurt a lot, but when he's on the field, there are clear signs of him being a really useful receiver, especially as a guy who I talked about with, like, Robbie Anderson earlier, who just his speed out of the slot on things like over routes and drag routes, it doesn't matter how good he is. It just provides a lot of value. Paris Campbell reaches that for sure. I think there's a decent chance he gets way higher, especially like fantasy-wise this year. But, yeah, he's a pretty useful player as is. Then we have Anthony Miller, who, I mean, is the best separator we've talked about in the last 20 or 25 guys. He's just horribly weak at the catch point, really struggles with physicality, which creates an interesting I don't know, dichotomy, because depending on what you value, he could be really low or really high on this. I guess I'm not. You could really argue for him being too much higher. Just like I said, he's so bad at just catching the ball, which is obviously an important part, but he's open all the time. I mean, he borders on the like 8 out of 10 stuff. So really interesting player, but I don't know if that catch stuff's ever going to get better. KJ Hamler, borderline identical actually to Anthony Miller, but he actually has time to get better. So you could see him moving up this for sure, but he's a guy who gets open a lot. You clearly see that Just really struggles with his actual ball skills. Next, we have David Moore. Player who's underrated for a long time in the Seahawks. Legitimately good as a third option. He knows what he's doing down the field. He can actually get open, all that stuff. Just struggles, kind of like other guys we talked about at this point, to do anything at an elite level or particularly quickly, which keeps him down here. Then we have Henry Ruggs. So now we're going to start to get into these speed guys who are just not very good at anything else. And frankly, Henry Ruggs might even be too high in here because his play speed, despite his legendary time speed or whatever going into the draft, his play speed last year on the Raiders was not very good. And there were times where it showed up, obviously the end of the Jets game being the number one example of that, but I don't know, he did some okay things as a gadget player. He wasn't horrible as a route running receiver, but he wasn't good at any of that stuff. And like I said, it's not like his speed actually was this terrifying presence for defenses when they played the Raiders most of the time. So that's more of an interesting thing. Is he going to get better? I would probably expect so. Are they going to use him smarter? I sure hope so. But as of now, just didn't really show a ton. Yeah, Van Jefferson. Pretty good actually. He's one of these separator guys who kind of similar to, I was going to say a James Washington maybe, in terms of he can separate, but his physical limitations past that kind of limit his upside in terms of not good after the catch, not really good if he is being covered tightly, but he's okay and he can get open decently. So definitely a player you like on your team. Michael Pittman Jr. Colts fans probably want to be higher. I kind of get why, but he's one of those guys like Tyler Boyd where I run into him and I'm like, anytime I'm watching him, it's what does he do that any of these other receivers wouldn't above him? And the answer is it's very infrequently that's something only he could do or only his type of receiver or his skill level could do. So that's kind of my issue with Michael Pittman at this point. Then Tre'Quan Smith. Tre'Quan Smith, actually similar to Van Jefferson as far as a guy who can get open, but not much other than that. He's a little bit better after the catch and a little bit worse in terms of his actual hands, but yeah, he's okay. He's a valuable player. He's decent. Then we have Jakeem Grant, who another one actually I could argue for being higher. I mean, he's pretty decent as a slot receiver in the 5 to 15 yard range. Just a little bit weak, not super great as a separator, but his speed is killer. And yeah, as far as value, I would actually, even looking at this, I think he probably does belong higher. Then we have Hunter Renfrow, another just a good slot receiver, just not quite as good as the other guys we talked about. Then N'Keal Harry. Does N'Keal Harry belong this high? I'd definitely say yes. So people are saying he's horrible and then he's a super bust, and I get that as a first-round pick. He probably does qualify as a bust so far, but I mean, listen, he's played on horrible teams, or sorry, not teams, offenses since he started, basically. I mean, he obviously was there for the last Tom Brady year, and one, he was hurt for a ton of that. Two, he was not nearly as bad as if you actually look at the tape and what he did during that time, as the reputation suggests, because of a couple bad drops. And three, like I said, this last year with Cam Newton, I mean, Jesus Christ. I don't know what you want, but you're not going to be able to show off like that. And yeah, as a player, he actually does fit a little bit into that Mike Williams, DeAndre Hopkins spectrum I was talking about. Now he's way on the lower end of it, of course, but of a guy who can on in-breaking routes and the intermediate level of the field do okay. I just don't agree with this reputation he has as someone who can't separate at all to save his life. I think he's actually very similar to Michael Pittman ahead of him, just a little bit worse about that. The one thing, though, is he was another guy who came into college with this huge reputation as an after-the-catch player, which hasn't really shown up, kind of similar to, like I said, CeeDee Lamb, which is just kind of an interesting thing. Then Kendrick Bourne, another Patriot. He's a guy who provides a decent amount of value close to the line of scrimmage very consistently. Past that, basically nothing, but that's a valuable skill. Next, Howard Johnson on Buccaneers. He maybe could be higher than this. He showed some pretty good things. He just not, one of these guys not super elite or really crazy notable at anything, but definitely a decent player. Then Richie James, again, a player who could be higher. I mean, talking about a guy who separates pretty well, actually similar to Jakeem Grant. Now, is your offense going to be all that good with him as a top 1 or 2 option? Very likely not, depending on obviously other factors, who your coach is, that type of thing. But yeah, I don't know. He's a useful player. Marquise Goodwin would be a lot higher. Just he is one of these players. I think age has definitely taken a step from him or two, but when he's on the field, he's decent. He's kind of a knockoff to Deshaun Jackson at this point. Damiere Byrd, just signed by the Bears. Yeah, he's pretty good. Again, another one of these guys that, because he was on the Cam Newton Patriots last year, looked kind of horrible. But well, actually, I would say he's probably the one who looked the least horrible. He's pretty decent actually. Just not, I mean, not going to drive your offense forward. He's all right. Preston Williams. Preston Williams has one kind of unique skill he's really good at in terms of 10-yard curls. He's going to body people and do those really well. Anything else you ask him to do, though, not super good. Then we have John Hightower in the Eagles. I think a player is super underrated, actually. He got roasted way too much for the state of the Eagles offense because they're like, oh, we have nobody to throw to. It's just like this, whatever, fifth-round rookie John Hightower. But he's actually pretty good. If you watch him as opposed to the workings of the rest of the offense, he's getting open a lot. Now, he does have some notable issues way down the field with kind of inaccurate bomb passes, which is an issue for the player that they drafted him to be, but he does a lot of things really well, and I actually don't think they even used him right. He could be a lot better than they're getting credit for. Jalen Guyton, really borderline identical player, to be honest with you. He was just playing with a better quarterback, and I think that's why he looked better. But they're both good. They're both players I like a lot. Tony Callaway, actually similar to those guys too. Another one who, is not really been able to show off because of the situations he's been put in, but a decent player for sure. Philip Dorsett, a guy who knows what he's doing on an NFL field, is valuable as a outside the numbers outlet option, last resort type thing. And he's not horrible the rest of the stuff, so he's all right. Zay Jones actually separates pretty well. He's kind of another one who gets too much hate for kind of some notable bad highlights, and he was really bad as a rookie year on the Bills for sure too. But yeah, Zay Jones, I mean, he's actually okay. Basically, if he's on he's on the field for your offense, you're gonna have a guy who's gonna be getting open a decent amount, and that's the most valuable thing. Then we have Christian Kirk. Christian Kirk, I think, of all the guys that we talked about recently, is probably the most controversial. He's just really bad at receiver skills. Really, really bad at them. His speed creates value, and when he's playing with Kyler Murray the way Kyler Murray plays, he's going to be fairly productive, but would he be more productive than if you switched him with like Marquise Goodwin or Richie James? No, I can very confidently say no, because you're talking about a player who's basically just fast, who struggles to separate in any situation really that any other receiver would just do better than him at. He's horrible after the catch. He's horrible at the catch point. He cannot track the ball to save his life, really, unless it's put perfectly on a silver platter for him. So, yeah, Christian Kirk, I don't hate like the guy personally or anything like that. It's very clear when you watch him on film compared to every guy we've talked about so far that he's just not there with being an actual receiver. Then Jalen Reagor, actually fairly similar. Now, he was hurt a lot. I'm going to give him a little bit of benefit of the doubt and think he could be better than this right now. But yeah, he's just a guy who, while doing some okay separation things, he doesn't do it better than any receiver we've talked about so far. And his main skill being speed down the field didn't actually show as being that useful because of some other limitations. Although he does fit into that Eagles offense being so just horrible, that he might be better than this. Then Andy Isabella, another borderline speed only guy. I could argue for having him over Christian Kirk. Actually, I still wouldn't at this point, but I don't know. I mean, that one thing is valuable. The top 100 is still players you're probably taking on your team, but not that good at other stuff. Marcus Robinson, maybe I should have him higher now that I'm looking at this. I don't know. I mean, he's fast enough to matter, and he's not bad at other stuff, but it's kind of it. Then we have D.D. Westbrook. D.D. Westbrook, a player whose flaws really came out last year. I thought going into the year he was a little bit better than this, but turns out he kind of fits in that Anthony Miller thing where he's just really, really bad at actually catching the ball. He's not good after the catch. He's not good down the field. So while his ability to separate in 0 to 15 yards is valuable, that's kind of all he offers, which runs into some issues. Then Mecole Hardman, another one probably controversial. Sorry, he's horrible at everything except for being fast. And the Chiefs would just be better off with any of the receivers ahead of him in their offense. Then we have Cam Sims. Cam Sims actually does some things I like as far as an after-the-catch player, kind of similar to like a Cordero Patterson. Not at that level, of course, but yeah, he just, as an actual receiver, he kind of struggles to separate himself from anyone that's above him so far, but he's not horrible. Then we have Josh Reynolds, another guy. He just doesn't add anything. Him and Zach Pascal actually both pretty similar. The next two there, they're not bad. They don't hurt your offense necessarily by being on the field, but they just don't add anything that the guys above them would have, and they don't yeah, maybe a little bit better, in tight spaces catching the ball, which is not useless, but yeah. Then we got Devin Funchess, who missed last year on the Packers, but actually I was a little bit excited about him going into the year because he knows what he's doing. I mean, he which is a compliment, really. He just, lacks the speed and athleticism to necessarily matter a whole lot more than just being outside the top 100 here because he's not going to add yards after the catch or during his routes. But he knows what he's doing. He can find space decently. He can use his body okay. Like, he's not horrible. Then Chester Rogers, a player I'm very surprised was not in the NFL last year. I think he gets underrated. He's pretty decent. He's one of these like slot type guys who gets open fairly frequently. Now he is on a lesser extent than the guys we talked about so far, but not a bad player. Then Mohamed Sanu. Yeah, I mean, at this point, he's actually kind of like Devin Funchess, just even smaller, who knows what he's doing, but that's kind of it at this point. Then we have Olabisi Johnson on the Vikings, who should be their clear number 3 receiver as the roster is constructed now. Who shows, especially as a rookie, he showed some things that I would have argued for putting him high on this list. As a guy who can actually separate, but he definitely runs into that, like, D.D. Westbrook thing of like, that's kind of all he offers. So, how valuable does that get? Now he's better at catching the ball and worse at actually being open, but yeah, I don't know. He's not horrible. Then Jeff Smith on the Jets, actually liked him. I could argue for him being higher. He did some nice things on a horrible offense with a horrible quarterback play last year. Because mostly by the time he played is with Joe Flacco in there. And yeah, I mean, he did some things as far as like a straight line speed guy in a way that I talked about with Paris Campbell and that type of thing, where he could be a useful player, but doesn't offer a whole lot else. Lynn Bowden Jr., whatever slot receiver, basically. He was kind of another one reputed as a good after-the-catch type of guy, playmaker, which I guess he'd still grow into. Didn't really get a lot of opportunities, but never did anything that I would argue separated him from anyone above him. Then Travis Fulgham. Travis Fulgham obviously had a run pretty good, and I think he's an important note here because when we're in the third receivers, we're still talking about guys who, when put on an NFL field, given context, can put up decent production over a small 3 to 4 sample size of games. Any of these guys that were around here could, because none of them suck, which is important to remember that when I'm still talking about them, despite them not actually adding anything to an offense, like through themselves, they can still be the recipient of positives from the offense they're playing in. So while the Eagles' offense was garbage for the guys I talked about before, what it did provide was a chance for Travis Fulgham to catch last-minute panicked contested catches, which he's good at, for sure. That's kind of it. Doesn't actually separate almost at all. Like, he has other issues, but yeah, he's just not a guy who adds anything to your offense, but if he's out there, you're not screwed or anything. Willie Snead, actually really similar player, to be honest with you. Maybe a little bit better at separating, but definitely more limited athletically at this point. He's fine, just doesn't add anything. Kiki Kuti, one of kind of the later ones in the slot archetype of guys who, I mean, he gets open a little bit, but that's it. Bad, kind of like just super knockoff D.D. Westbrook, where he's just not good at anything past that. Then Brandon Powell, who now with the Bills was on the Falcons. Maybe I could argue for me higher. Actually, he showed some things bordering on like the way I thought of Rashard Higgins going into this year, of like he actually gets open decently. Now he runs into that thing I've talked about with multiple other guys where what else does he do? Not much, but that's not an invaluable skill. There's a reason he is high. Then Teron Johnson on the Chargers, kind of a speed-only guy at this point who's not horrible, but that's kind of all he does. Then Colin Johnson on the Jags. He's just not fast enough to really be higher than this. He does some okay things, as at the catch point as far as a intermediate receiver. He's not horrible, but it's kind of edge. Kobe Myers, fairly similar actually. Looks different, but in terms of just guys that lack speed but can do okay within 20 yards of the line of scrimmage. Then Devin Duvernay, a little bit of a disappointment for the Ravens. I think they were expecting to be more now. With the Ravens, they use the receiver so wonky that it's hard to make super big declaration, but yeah, he's just kind of, there basically. Cedric Wilson, actually similar kind of speed slot guy who doesn't do much of anything else. Not horrible, not really good though. Marvin Hall, I believe, is actually a free agent. I don't think he's on the Browns at this point, but he uniquely actually is incredibly good at tracking the ball down the field. One of the best in the NFL. His problem is that he like legit sucks at everything else. So take that for what you will. That one skill's useful 1 out of every 30 plays or whatever. But yeah, not useless, but kind of just more of an interesting thing. Then Isaiah McKenzie, really just a gadget player, not necessarily even a full wide receiver at this point. He's not horrible at the stuff, but doesn't really add anything. Deion Kane, a player who fits into that, like he separates actually okay. Does he really do anything else? Not necessarily, but it's still a useful thing. Kadarius Hodge, fairly similar. Bryan Edwards, a little bit of a disappointment for the Raiders. He worries me in terms of when being these like outside the numbers, slow guys. He's only good for contested catches, which is just not a useful thing. And you can really see Tim Patrick is the same thing below him. Tim Patrick is probably better at it. He's just worse at everything else. Maybe he should be a little bit higher. You could argue for. I don't know necessarily if you put any of the receivers above him into his spot. I think they would get better results, to be frank. I do think he's better than Equanimeous St. Brown, though. Now this is so the Packers' first receiver is at number 1. Their second receiver is all the way down here at number 122. Clear reasons for that. Equanimeous St. Brown, he fits into that Deion Kane mold that I just talked about. He can get open a little bit, but that's it. Quintez Cephas. Same thing, but even more limited by speed. Donovan Peoples-Jones, really, really unrefined as a route runner. There's a chance he gets a whole lot better than this, but definitely not there yet. More of a just contested catch, maybe Tim Patrick without the actual receiver skills at this point. Justin Watson, kind of same thing. Benny Fowler, another one actually of these veterans, so I could argue for being higher. Now he's probably not even going to be in the NFL for much longer, so whatever. But yeah, he's okay at at receiver stuff, but doesn't actually necessarily add anything. Chris Conley is just kind of a bad receiver. I really like Chris Conley as a Jaguars fan, as like a guy, but he's just his speed, and his speed isn't even like useful the way that a Mecole Hardman's is. His speed, because it takes so long to actually get going, he just doesn't actually offer anything. Can't really catch, whatever. Then Marquez Valdes-Scantling, really bad. He just doesn't do anything except for go deep. And he's not even good at that. Aaron Rodgers puts him in such positive situations that by virtue of him being an NFL athlete, he creates positive outcomes. But again, if you put Tim Patrick in his spot or Bryan Edwards, are they going to do a lot better? I would argue pretty clearly yes. And then we're kind of going to run through a lot of the rest of these. And when I say every player, though, I meant it. Trent Taylor, kind of just whatever slot guy, maybe could be a little bit higher, just doesn't necessarily impact anything. Marquez Callaway, he's going to be in this mold of receiver who, what I'm talking about with players who get open 0 to 20 yards. He's going to be that, except for it's only 0 to 12 yards, which just even further limits the value of that type of player. Dante Pettis is so incredibly weak that the physicality just destroys him. I don't really see how he plays in the NFL any meaningful number of snaps at this point. Michael Thomas on the Bengals, same thing as Marcus Callaway, really. Vincent Smith, same thing. Christian Blake, same thing. A lot of these guys at this point are that type of player. Nick Westbrook, we'll talk about him a little bit more. I think there's a chance he could be higher. But I will say that he was benefited for playing in the really smart Titans offense as opposed to some of these dumb offenses like Christian Blake and the Falcons. So maybe they're not necessarily different, but I did see a little bit more from him than that. Ashton Dulin on the Colts, kind of speed-only guy. Kelvin Harmon, this is another one who I think could be a little bit higher. Now, he missed the vast majority of his whole career pretty much so far. But I don't know, he did flash some things I do like, but, long-term, is he a guy I think is going to necessarily get a lot better? I don't know. Cleve Freeman, speed-only guy. Noah Brown, one of those 10 to 12-yard guys. On Tate, same thing, but even slower. Byron Pringle, good special team player. When he's not a disaster on the field, as you saw when he played for the Chiefs, but does he really offer anything that the guys that behind him don't? Yes and no. He's better down the field, worse anywhere else, so whatever. Ray McLeod, kind of a gadget slot guy. Maybe he could be a little bit higher. I don't. Does he really do anything that this other guy don't? Probably not. Isaiah Wright, same thing. Separates a little bit. That's kind of it. Greg Ward Jr. He's a slot guy, but doesn't do any of the positive things all the other slot receivers we talked about so far do. Just if you switched him with any of the other players you talked about, I would very heavily suspect they would just do better. Chad Beebe, same thing. Steven Sims Jr., same thing. Those are all just slot guys who get open by virtue of being in the slot, basically. Dante Moncrief, oh, man, did he drop off. He's so bad as far as a separator, and his hands at the catch point are just comical at this point, have been for a couple of years. Deshaun Hamilton, another slot guy who only gets open by being in the slot, and even he just almost doesn't even get open despite being in the slot. It's kind of incredible, actually. Olamide Zacchaeus, speed-only guy. Quez Watkins, speed-only guy. Riley Ridley, one of these 10 to 12-yard guys. I could argue he could actually get a little bit higher than this and be a little bit better. He hasn't gotten very much opportunity at all. Damian Ratley, just a guy who doesn't suck if he's on the field necessarily. Gandy Golden, very little opportunity. He's another one that could be a lot higher, but when he did play for the Washington football team this last year, didn't really show anything that was particularly impressive. Tyrell Williams, yes, of all the normally I think you've seen that I put more of a stress on veteran receivers being higher because I think they clearly are, most of them still in the NFL for good reasons. Tyrell Williams not one of those. Even when he was put up that 1,000-yard season on the Raiders, like, listen, he's a mediocre speed only guy who kind of got thrown into a wildly good circumstance. And frankly, I don't think there's much of a difference at all between him and the next player, Jake Kumaro. Then DeAndre Carter, just one of these kind of more on teams because he offers value as a returner than anything. He's not horrible. Freddie Swain, another one I could argue, actually, I think of anyone on this list, he's probably the one I'm least qualified to talk about. I haven't watched a ton of him yet. I will before the season starts, of course. But from what I did watch, nothing super impressive there. Mac Hollins actually separates a little bit, but bad hands, doesn't do much else. Terry Godwin doesn't add anything. And once you get past Terry Godwin, now we're kind of into the more or less negatives, which, listen, that's a good thing for the NFL that we're already to 160 before we kind of get into players who are hurting their offense as opposed to just not helping. But yeah, so Braxton Berrios, I mean, he just – when you have a slot player, right, which already provides a ton of built-in advantages in terms of being open close to the line of scrimmage, turns that into not being able to get open close to the line of scrimmage very frequently, that hurts real bad, and Braxton Berrios is that. Tajay Sharp is a theoretically guy who is either speed-only guy or a guy who can get open down the field. He, in practice, is neither of those things. Robert Foster, gadget, like only player. CJ Board is just not athletic enough to provide anything besides a guy who wouldn't get open anytime that any other receiver would, basically. Duke Williams, kind of same thing. JJ Arcega-Whiteside. Yeah, it sucks to see him all the way down here, but the question is, what does he do better than any of the players you talked about so far? And the answer is nothing. Which hurts, but it's true. Keyshawn Johnson, actually a really similar player, to be honest. Brandon Zylstra, like a punt returner only, basically. Rico Gafford, too small to really do much in the NFL. Quan Treadwell, same thing, but he's too slow instead of too small. Derek Willies, he's another one actually that I will say that I don't have a ton of background on, so he can maybe be a little bit higher, but whatever. Keelan Doss, limited athletically. Another one actually I could argue for being higher. He's not horrible, but whatever. Miles Boykin, what does he add that another receiver doesn't? Nothing, basically. Marcel Aitman, kind of actually the same thing. Javon Williams, really all these guys. Now you're talking about outside the numbers receivers who don't get open and aren't particularly good at anything else, which just is very limiting to their upside. Javon Williams, Ryan Switzer, just a punt returner. Austin Mack, whatever. DeAndre White, just a punt returner, basically. Alex Erickson, just a punt returner. Isaiah Zuber, more or less just a punt returner. Juwan Winfrey, one of those outside guys. Joe Reed. Looking at this, I will argue I probably should put Joe Reed higher. He flashed at least a little bit of ability to be open in the slot for sure, so I will admit that as I'm looking at this. Little Jordan Humphrey. What does he do? Jamarcus Bradley. That's a sample size thing. There's a chance he's a lot better than that, but he only played basically one game for the Browns. Trent Sherfield literally doesn't do anything. KJ Hill, actively bad, was kind of horrible for the Chargers. One of the worst receivers that I saw in the NFL, obviously, being in this low. Lawrence Cager, kind of the same thing, just wasn't do at all. That's a positive. Josh Malone. Geronimo Allison, who sat out last year, but whoa, man, is he bad. He's like that KJ Hill thing that I mentioned briefly, but instead of a sample size of like 3 games, it's a sample size of like 3 years that he does those things, and you're just dropping easy passes, just not understanding how to be open. Yeah. But drum roll, worst receiver in the NFL, we're down to 1, River Craycraft of the 49ers. I forgot to put the team there, whatever at this point. He's just bad. He just doesn't do anything to positive. So yeah, that's ranking every receiver in the NFL. Obviously, I'm sure a lot of people are going to have a lot of arguments about that. That's fine with me. I can easily defend all these positions, and I'd be happy to. It's a fun conversation. But yeah, that's ranking every receiver in the NFL for 2021.